But it's the first episode of 2020
Yeah.
of the Rhubarb podcast, so we've made it this far.
13
Probably
or
about
14.
when did we start this podcast? I feel like September time.
Last year.
Yeah, August, September maybe.
Probably August. Feels like
Yeah.
it was earlier. Yeah.
So about 6 months.
yeah.
So yeah, with little breaks in between. So we've done well.
And a large one between this one and our last, but you know, it's
Yeah.
been holiday season, so
That's it, to be
Yeah.
expected. So yeah, we're back for another episode, new year. Great episode because we're going to be talking about movie soundtracks with Simon and Tristan from Movie Squad.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello.
Oh, sorry, I kind of did that a bit awkwardly. I
love
didn't
it.
tell you how I was going to do it.
No, look, we and thank you for adhering to our contract to appear that there would be applause when we were introduced. So thanks for doing that.
No, not a problem at all. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. For those who are aware of you, you do the Movie Squad podcast and also the segment on RTR on Friday's breakfast show.
Yes, Breakfast with Taylor, every 7:30 Friday morning. It's us two, and sometimes a fill-in reviewer. Just we talk usually about 2 films each week. I
Yep.
think that's a good, size for the 30 minutes that we have to
Yeah.
to dig in and discuss. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's always great hanging out with Simon and talking about the flops and the hits.
Yeah.
And all the great movies that we get to see, and some of the bad ones we get to see as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all cinema,
That's it. So we were having a conversation just before, and I listened to, I think it was your second most recent appearance on Movie Squad. I wanted to open up with one of my favorite movie soundtracks at the moment, Uncut Gems, the soundtrack by Daniel Lofferton, otherwise known as 10 Tricks Point Never, when he's on Warp's record label. What did you guys think of that soundtrack? Because I absolutely loved it. There was so many lush synths, and I was even watching a behind the music where he mentioned that Moog had actually sent him patches to emulate the sound of Vangelis's on Blade Runner's soundtrack.
That's cool.
And so, Moog, the synth manufacturer, were actually kind of participating and achieving some of these sounds in the film. So I thought that was a nice touch. And, for such a chaotic film, it's literally, categorized from what I've seen online as ambient. So
it's very serene, the soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the only calm thing about the movie that I've noticed so far.
Yeah.
But it's so omnipresent. There's something about it's like that drowning in like a sea of bees kind of feeling, like that buzz, that persistent. Yeah, it is ambient, but it's not going away. And then as it slowly creeps up like the film, it is it is very intense. And I have to admit, I wasn't really even familiar with, I'm not even going to try and say the name. What is it? 10 Point Tricks Never? Did I get it
It took me
right?
about 4 or 5 months to wrap my head around
Yeah.
it when I first heard
And
about
that was
it.
a punt. That could have gone any number of ways. But I wasn't familiar until you kind of pointed me in his direction, Tristan. But it was around good time. You would kind of, I think, listen to the soundtrack before seeing the movie, which was the Safdie brothers' last flick. And yeah, that was another fantastic soundtrack as well. Were you
Same guy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So were you familiar with them before that?
No, and see, I think there's a lot of other people who know more about music than I do. Particularly some people at the TRFM station, like Will Backler, who go deep and long with 10 Point Tricks Never and the albums that he's released. But I think his soundtrack work is minimal and related, I think, to the 2 Safdie brothers movies, and I think he may have done a track for the Bling Ring as well. I should look that up. Anyway, but the great thing about the Safdie brothers movies, and one thing about the soundtrack, is that the movies kind of operate between sort of very authentic documentary style street casting, like the sense of realness, but then there's also this like hyper stylistic quality, and the music really serves that, particularly when you watch Good Time and it's about the stressful endeavor where this brother is trying to get his brother out of jail, and then you have this like blaring synth that makes it sound like a video game, and how much that just adds to the anxiety as well. And even though there are moments that are very serene in Uncut Gems, like there are just moments where the sound mix is amazing because people are trying to talk above the music, and then the music is just like swamping the mat, and you're just like, I can't hear what people are yelling about, and it just adds to the chaotic feeling. I feel.
Yeah, I would kind of almost liken it to sort of what Simon had touched on, It's because it's so omnipresent, and it's such a stark contrast to what's happening in the scenes where it's all chaos and kind of just almost it's like drowning or something like that. It's just surrounds you, and you kind of it almost adds to the sense of helplessness that you have watching the film. Like you just want the character to get the freaking gem back, and all the while there's this synth score that's just kind of just somehow adding to the sense of stress.
There's also something like cosmic about it.
Yeah.
You know, like, and there's that kind of theme throughout the film as well that this gem, real or not, has this like mystical power over Kevin Garnett.
Yeah.
And the way, even that opening and closing shot, without spoiling anything, the way it goes into the gem, it does kind of have this otherworldliness to it. So we're kind of like, we're sort of participating from the outside at this like, this.
It's like a very, like their other films, very fly on the wall.
Yeah,
kind of.
and we're sort of above it and beyond it to a degree. So, but I love it. I think it's a better combo than it was in Good Time, even though it was fantastic in that film.
Yeah, I watched the film Heaven Knows What the day after Uncut Gems, and I was very excited to hear the soundtrack, because that wasn't by Daniel Lopatin, but it was very similar. A lot of those, arpeggiated synths and lush pads and very similar kind of style. Maybe a little bit more aggressive than the other two. Yeah. Ariel Pink actually makes a cameo in that.
Yeah, I heard
and
that.
there's a deleted scene where he argues with the New York saxophone guy. Remember that viral video years ago with the guy? I think it might be a trumpet. Guy's playing trumpet in New York on the street busking, and this very small man storms up, and he's like, "You don't know music, you don't respect music," and he's like, "I went to music school for 8 years." And have you seen this one?
I don't think I have.
It was very viral at the time, and he's just going absolutely off, and he's making a bit of a silly billy of himself, and they actually convinced him to do that in this film, but they cut the scene, and he's ranting at Ariel Pink, who's playing like a homeless heroin addict. And he's just sitting there, and he's like, "Go away, man." He's like, "Whatever, man."
I love the idea. I mean, Heaven Knows What is, even compared to those other two films, it's just so brutal. It's so brutal.
It is.
The idea that the Safdie brothers could sit there and go, "You know what? This is too much. This is too much arguing. We finally hit the threshold. Let's cut one argument between a heroin addict and a homeless man. Let's just get that one out of the way."
Yeah.
So are they these directors? The
Safdie brothers.
Safdie brothers. So are they actively seeking out electronic musicians to score their films? Is that just a thing that they?
Who did Heaven Knows What? But they just, I think, obviously they struck up a relationship with Daniel Lopatin, and
they've made music videos. Like, I think they're from that. Well, they actually directed a Jay-Z music video a couple years ago. Yeah, the Mercy Me video, I think, from memory. And they just released a short film with Adam Sandler as well. It's called Goldman versus Silverman or something like that. It's about two street performers, and it's only about 10 minutes long, and it has a similar kind of soundtrack. I'd be interested to know again if they've utilized some other electronic artist, or whether they've worked with 100.Tricks Never again. But yeah, they definitely kind of. They sort of.
You got it on the second time, by the way.
Oh, did I get it again?
You got it right.
Oh, I thought it was
the first time.
I did get it wrong the first time.
You did, but you got the words right, but around the wrong way. And then you nailed it on that one.
Wow.
So I wanted to reassure you that you'd figured it out.
I wish
really
throw
quickly.
every combination.
I wish I
I'm
remembered.
pretty impressed. Yeah.
I wish I remembered even which way I said it that second time. The third time, I'm not going to try it a third time. But yeah, they clearly like to live in this world.
Yeah, and obviously have some deep ties to the music industry, and that's had an influence on how their filmmaking has sort of come about. So
yeah, I haven't watched Daddy Longlegs yet. It's waiting. Is the soundtrack to that good? Have you watched that one?
Well,
or is there not much emphasis on it?
I haven't seen, and I want to, and it's hard to find copies or where they might be streaming for their earlier films, Daddy Longlegs and The Pleasure of Being Robbed. And I don't know, but it seems as well that the style of those films, I mean, I think they might go into plots that are a little bit observational and chaotic, but they seem a bit more lo-fi, almost like mumblecore kind of films.
I was going to say, I always wanted to see Daddy Longlegs. It's not legally available in Australia.
I think it might be on Criterion Channel. I've not signed up to it.
That sounds probably.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. It was kind of at that time where the Duplass brothers and Greta Gerwig and that kind of mumblecore crew emerged. So My gut feel is that is probably a more pared back movie, but
Yeah.
again, we're speaking with that authority.
Because I've seen people online refer to Uncut Gems, Heaven Knows What, and Good Time as their addiction trilogy. So
Yeah,
they kind
sure.
of sit differently
wow.
to their other films. And I think that's a really good comparison because all those films, whether it's gambling and the rush of, the next,
Sure.
big thrill, or whether it's heroin or whether it's, LSD in a Sprite bottle. Like, that addiction to, in that movie's case, money, that, is the seed of, or the catalyst of that chaos.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I've never seen them officially refer to it as that. I don't think that's an official thing, but when I heard people talk or read people talking about it, it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And I agree with it. So yeah, Uncut Gems. What films did you guys have a think about? What are some of your
Favorite soundtracks?
Favorite official soundtracks?
Well,
No bootlegs.
well, I'd like to hear Simon's.
Oh, here we go.
start, yeah.
You're throwing to me first. All right. I'll pull up the old list. Oh, look, the first one that did come to mind, and I might actually be cribbing one from Tristan. Well, the first one that came to mind was Boogie Nights.
Oh, wow.
But I did actually want to steer away from that. I thought, because maybe you would bring it up. But The Last Days of Disco, the Whit Stillman film, which is, I guess when you were kind of mentioning soundtracks, I ran through a few different ideas, which was, okay, are we talking scores? Are we talking, artists who have developed, the whole soundtrack? And I've got a few sort of each. But I did want to bring a kind of compilation to the table. And I always think about, growing up in my household, you could not move for the Forrest Gump soundtrack being played, with both discs, just like classic, parents loved that Forrest Gump soundtrack.
Yeah.
But I think there's something special about a good compilation
Absolutely.
and
Yeah,
having that in
yeah.
a film. And
Dazed and Confused is one that comes to
That's
mind.
a great-
as a great compilation one.
Yeah, and Richard Linklater's obviously great at that kind of thing as well, and great musical moments. But yeah, Boogie Nights and The Last Days of Disco are just these great, disco late 70s kind of combos. And what I like about them is they kind of do, they veer into the the deep cuts, but they do still have the daggy stuff on there because it is the late 70s, specifically, and early 80s in the case of Boogie Nights. And to have, and I think Last Days of Disco is 1980. Is that what it said? 79, 80, thereabouts. Just to have those, chic on that soundtrack.
You have to acknowledge the dark side of disco.
Yeah, the dark side of disco, exactly.
Well, like Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah, and of course, I love the closing scene in The Last Days of Disco with the OJ's Love Train, where they're dancing along on the actual train. So yeah, that was one that they were the two that came to mind. Good compilations, like you could put them on at a dinner party, at a regular party, just when you're around the house, and they just work.
And people don't have to know that they're soundtracks. It could be
No,
be like
that's it,
the best
yeah.
hits of the 77 or whatever. Like,
Or
it's,
you've made this awesome mix. Like,
The one that's actually
Sick tape.
it's, pretty popular seller when I get it through the doors is, I can't speak for the film because I'm not a fan, but The Big Chill has like a fantastic soundtrack just full of Motown classics, and you could easily stick that on at a party and people would just think you were playing a great Motown soundtrack.
They don't need to picture Glenn Close crying in the shower.
No,
or
no one needs to do
Kevin
that.
Costner dead on a slab. Is he the one who plays the corpse in The Big Chill?
Yeah, see, like, and that's, my parents both had the Forrest Gump soundtrack and the Big Chill one, and the Big Chill is such a
Everyone had it.
iconic soundtrack because it does collect all these brilliant Motown songs, and it's funny, like I would grow up with it just looking at the cover and just think, what is this movie about? And it's just about these yuppies in the 80s like just dancing in the kitchen to these songs. So it is an interesting way that they actually use the songs in the film. But this is an era like the 80s, particularly where like, the soundtrack becomes like just like another entity that you can sell and mass market. And if you've got like a great compilation, people will just like buy it.
Absolutely.
And they don't even have to care or think about the film. Yeah. The one that I would add to that pile is that's sometimes when you get soundtracks that are released, you don't get all the songs, so that's always disappointing.
Yeah.
So
some license holder's not willing to chuck it on there, and you're like,
or they just go like, it's just one soundtrack, so this is one CD or one LP, we can't put everything on there. But so that's why, to me, the official Goodfellas soundtrack is kind of disappointing because it's only got about 11 of the 88 songs
I
that are in
nearly
that
put
movie.
that on my list before I realized that actually. Yeah.
Is Layla on there?
That is on there. So
that's
thankfully.
that's a very significant part of the film.
I was going to
guess.
say,
Yeah. But so to me, I prefer this Casino soundtrack because that at least has 2 CDs of material, and much like Forrest Gump, that just goes through different decades, different styles. You got Louis Prima and Devo like on the same disc. It's a bit more eclectic and strange, but it's kind of like a dark cousin to the Forrest Gump soundtrack.
You know, one of the worst offenders in this same kind of genre that has left off an iconic song is, whatever your feelings about the movie, I quite like it. American Hustle, the David O. Russell film, has, again, it's set, I think, in the late 70s, and it's got all these great songs. And the opening sequence to that film is set to Steely Dan's Dirty Work, which is just a perfect setup for that whole movie, and it's not on there. And it's a great song. Why is it? I don't know what happened there.
So if you get into film and you love soundtracks, that can be like the and that's what it's happening with vinyl releases and reissues, is that they go like, okay, here's everything that was in the film, but yeah, if you get that soundtrack and you're missing that iconic moment or that song, you feel cheated.
Yeah, I'd be happy to pay extra money for a box set or a 3 or 4 LP if it meant having the complete collection of songs.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Liam, you had you mentioned a compilation one to me before when we were cross-checking our lists to make sure we didn't double up.
I did probably.
Was it The Crow?
It was actually, yeah. Yeah. So the reason I like that soundtrack so much, obviously, beside the fact that I love the film, is that it's full of really great cover versions and a lot of songs that I don't think were recorded on albums from the artist. So I think a lot of songs, I could be wrong, but I think
Pantera had 2 songs on there. That
I believe the majority of the artists actually recorded songs for the soundtrack. So you've got 9 Inch Nails covering Joy Division, which is awesome. Pantera covering Poison Idea.
Yeah.
You've got Rollins Band covering Suicide. It's just like probably one of the only soundtracks that I can listen to from start to finish and enjoy. And it's just so quintessentially 90s as well, which I love about it. Because for me, the 1990s, particularly like the early to mid 1990s, was like the golden age of cinema, I think, other than obviously the actual golden age. So
golden age too,
electric boogaloo. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just evokes all the things that I love about like 1990s cinema. And, and it's like gothic and dark and cool. So
it's very 90s cinema.
Yeah.
Like I love the 90s era of cinema and just like the camera technology they had at the time and just the production values that period of cinema really encapsulated.
Yeah, there's a lot of
it's
dry
probably
ice
because
in the
I was
Crow as
quite
well.
young at that time when those were like the big films, and to me it's like probably like a comfort kind of thing of like I'm a kid.
I like I know what you're talking about. I like watching them now because they finally feel like period films. There's something about it, like watching Heat.
Watching Wayne's World, you're just this is art.
But you're looking
I love Wayne's World.
It's like this is at least 50 years ago. This is at least 55 years ago, and then it's like, well, it was 25 years ago. That's still something. That's still a chunk of time away. And there's probably even a great compilation to be made out of all those, not necessarily grunge but those alternative acts who were signed to labels in en masse in the early 90s and were all commissioned to do one song for whatever soundtrack, like a compilation of all those songs. They never wound up on albums separately. I'm trying to think of some examples. I mean, Radiohead's, I think, Talk Show Host is on Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, exactly.
And just all those acts were suddenly signed, and they were contractually obligated to be on the Sony release, right? So there's probably a million of them, but I think The Crow is a good example of that.
That's a great example, though, Romeo and Juliet. I'd forgotten entirely about that.
Yeah, Garbage have Number One Idiot. Is that what it's called? Something like that. Anyway.
See, my sister, when I was growing up, my sister had that soundtrack, so I would borrow it from her and listen to it. And that was one that, they eventually was so popular that they came up with a second disc.
That's right.
And they had some like remixes and stuff on there. But and that one, like there are songs on there that seem like created or sculpted for the film, and then they become these like iconic kind of moments as well.
Freddy versus Jason was another one that springs to mind.
What are this? I've seen the film, but what's on the soundtrack?
Is that more of a hip hop one? I'm trying to think of that.
It's a real mix. It's very like early 2000s. There's Sepultura and Mike Patton do a track on there together, which is, I mean, who wouldn't want to hear that? And there's just like lots of crossovery kind of stuff on there. It's like 2 artists together, like who've written
Like
and
Freddy vs.
recorded.
Jason style. Was that?
Yeah,
the
and
actual- I love that.
yeah.
Actually,
What a
You know what's
concept,
funny? That never occurred to me before you mentioned it. But yeah, like I just love those, unique soundtracks where you just don't get those recordings on anything else, and I think that's a fantastic idea. But yeah, that's the only compilation one I had. The other two are the other two are scores really, but yeah.
You've reminded me of two like popular soundtracks, and I think they're from the same producer, but they had that thing of like getting two desperate bands together to create music so like Judgment Night is a film that some people have not even seen or remember, but that soundtrack is very iconic for a generation because it brought together like hip hop artists and grunge or alternative artists. I think that's the one that's got Anthrax and Public Enemy doing a song together.
Yeah.
And then
Bring the
Bring the
Noise.
Noise.
Bring
Yeah.
and then there was the one that my sister owned, which was the Spawn soundtrack, which had kind of like goth industrial bands collaborating with electronic. So I remember borrowing that soundtrack and getting 4 tracks because I liked them so much. And that was like Crystal Method and someone else. Filter.
It's still popular on vinyl, that soundtrack, actually.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, they
I
did
mean,
it for
yeah.
a record store a couple of years back, I think.
Yeah, we've had it through, and it sold very quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, great
Actually,
movie too.
speaking of vinyl, the Crow soundtrack was unavailable for a very long time, and
It
became
had actually never been issued on vinyl.
never been, yeah.
It was issued on vinyl for the first time for Record Store Day last year.
Oh wow.
It was
and
like definitely the number 1 requested record
yeah,
of
that
record store
and
day.
Wow.
and the reissue of Bill Murray and
Groundhog
Scarlett
Day?
Johansson.
Oh.
Lost in
Lost in
Translation.
Yeah,
Translation,
the
yeah.
reissue of Lost in Translation, which is another fantastic soundtrack. Like Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine did a lot of the
Yeah, right.
score work for that.
Oh, I didn't know
But there's
that.
also
That's been on my to watch list for a while. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just
Wow.
gone up a few
definitely
notches,
listen. Yeah. So there's My Bloody Valentine tracks on it. It's mostly compiled of shoegaze songs, and then anything that's the score to the film is Kevin Shields
Cool.
and his many pedals.
Yeah,
But yeah, lost my train of thought now.
that's all right.
Just too busy thinking.
Should we
about...
jump on the train of thought of scores then? Because I've got one. This one I actually wrote down all of it because there's a little teaser in the middle of this episode. We'll be jumping on the Movie Squad podcast, so you've got 2 crossover episodes. Simpsons meets Futurama.
What like
Remember when that happened? That was big news for
Yeah.
me.
Thank you for doing that and not Simpsons Meet Family.
Yeah, I was just gonna say
yeah.
that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I remember there was a spin-off. I was a big fan of the X-Files, and they were supposed to do a spin-off where the X-Files would cross over with Picket Fences because they were both Fox shows, and it didn't end up happening. So there you go.
Oh wow.
But then you get the crossover of all crossovers, which is the character played by
Lisa
it-
Kudrow.
No. I was going to
Because
say
that's the example. If you were going to go for that example, we would be vibrating on too close a frequency.
No. It was the Law and Order detective played by Richard Belzer, who has like
Oh.
appeared on so many other TV shows
Yeah.
as either a joke or a crossover.
Detective Munch,
Detective Munch. I think he appeared on an episode of the X-Files.
the Munchiverse. Yeah.
The Munchiverse.
I was going to reference, and this is so pointless. I don't even know why we're on this digression.
Go ahead.
But I said Lisa Kudrow, of course, the Mad About You Friends crossover with Ursula, the character
Oh, I'm not
existing
aware
in
of
both
Oh, no.
in both universes.
Sounds
Anyway,
like
let's
a
move on.
universe that I don't ever want to live in.
this. Well, the soundtrack that I'm bringing up is Vangelis's score. Original score to Blade Runner. However,
I thought you were going to say
No.
Chariots of Fire for a second.
nah. I mean, it's pretty iconic, but
Nowhere near as cool though.
Yeah, nowhere near as cool. However, not the officially released one. The 4 CD bootleg that is heavily theorized that Vangelis actually leaked himself because the label didn't want to put it out, and he was like, "No, I want this out there." He obviously, as many people know, did the soundtrack for Blade Runner. Very iconic soundtrack.
So was that particular the cut you're talking about? Was that just music that was never used? Was it used for one of the cuts?
It's got everything. Like it's
Oh, it's
basically
everything,
like
right.
the studio sessions of it.
Got it.
But there's a lot of Foley art in there too
That's
that they
cool.
put in there. But basically, Blade Runner soundtrack, it's extended. A lot of the tracks that they had to condense to release onto an album and now in their full composition form. one of the discs as well is one of my favorite, like kind of field recording style ambient albums, where I think it's the third disc. It's basically like just spending an hour in the world of Blade Runner without barely any music. It's just kind of, like a field recording. So there's one track that's Deckard's apartment. And it's got that whirring going on in the background. And it's like, I used to put that on late at night on my bookshelf speakers and just lie in bed and just close my eyes and take myself to another world. And it's very soothing, relaxing. And then you've got like some remixes on the fourth disc. And the second disc, I think, is a lot of unreleased material that never made it to the film, but he, did it as part of setting up this world and, all this source material that he provided them to use. But yeah, a lot of extended tracks as well, which makes it my favorite. I would say that's my favorite movie soundtrack. Straight up.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing, but it's such a weird, wide world when you get into that bootleg stuff. Like you might just be going along your merry way thinking, oh well, there's just a soundtrack for Blade Runner, but then you look it up and you're like, no, there's all these like releases and these versions that people have put out there. A lot of them you can get on YouTube, I guess, to listen to, but I have
bought the vinyl edition for the moral conundrum.
Yes, yeah. But it's a deep dank world, the Blade Runner bootlegs. But the one that you mentioned, I love listening to that one as well, which is like, it's basically just like, Deckard's apartment. So like the scene of like 5 minutes that he's just like, changing his shirt or whatever. Like you can listen to an hour of that and just like, oh yeah, I'm in Blade Runner, it's great.
I think I remember seeing someone make like a 12-hour extended version.
Right.
Like there's a channel on YouTube where this guy he gets like the background soundtracks from different like sci-fi shows and movies, and then just like cuts them so that they loop seamlessly, and then he'll upload like a 12-hour version so you can chuck it on for as long as you like. And I think he's done a Deckard's apartment one as well. So if you want, you've got the hour, but if that's not long enough, 12 hours is out there.
That's for when the date night courting needs just a little bit longer.
Like that could maybe. I feel like there's a meme there with the American Psycho, Huey Lewis in the News when he pulls it out and he goes on a rant about Huey Lewis in the News. You could do that with the Blade Runner 5-disc. I think it's called the Esper Edition bootleg soundtrack. But you mentioned, but I think you both mentioned that you had some scores as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Tristan, you want to crack on with scores?
Sure. Well, I've got a very long list, and so there's not going to be enough time to get through everything. But I think I might, mention this one because we were talking a little bit about, ones that kind of hit you at a moment in your life, when you're younger or a teenager. Yeah. And I just remember, like, I love the movie The Untouchables, directed by Brian De Palma, about Al Capone. It's very fictionalized. Not everything that happens in the movie happened in real life. But I remember watching that as a kid and just thinking, other movies that had scores in it, that was just like, whatever. That was, that was orchestra and boring, whatever. Whereas, like, when the movie starts, I was just like, oh my God, this is like I just remember thinking it was cool, like, and it, it's a great score, and the thing that I loved about it when I was a kid was the opening piece, The Strength of the Righteous, and then but now I love the ending one, the kind of very triumphant, soaring Ennio Morricone score at the closing credits. But yeah, I love that soundtrack, and I just wanted to throw in Ennio Morricone in there because he's the maestro.
Yeah,
and that soundtrack, he's got so many that are great, and there are so many that for films that you might not have ever heard of, and you get into it and you go, "Wow, this is great stuff." But
it's I always love consciousness style composer.
I mean, he seems. Well, I mean, during the 60s and 70s, he was. I mean, that kind of era, they were pumping them out.
Yeah,
and he made these scores for films that, whether it be a giallo film or a spaghetti western, but they're just like amazing. Yeah. And then I think as he went on in the 80s and 90s, he was pretty productive. But I just think with this one, it's such a great score. And so and when I found a a secondhand copy in a record store, I was just over the moon. I was just like, I already had it on CD, but I was just like, now I've got it on vinyl. This is great. So yeah, I'll give it up for the Untouchables score by Ennio Morricone.
Awesome. I'm going to have to check that out. But to throw it in there, I was very surprised / disgusted to learn that it took till The Hateful Eight for him to actually win an Oscar.
Yeah, with a score that is probably fine. Like that.
I love that
couldn't-
one. That's one of my favorite ones as well.
Right,
Like,
I couldn't even retain. I mean, that's not a criticism against it, but when you think
Yeah.
of all the Morricone themes, you can
right. It's
hum
not
and sing. Yeah,
certainly not the most iconic of his.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Particularly how many times, I mean, like The Mission was another soundtrack that I grew up with. I had no idea what the film was about, but my parents just like bought it because it was such a beautiful score, and
Yeah.
I would have thought that was a winner of the Academy Awards, but no. So
really funny. The Mission.
yeah,
It's really funny.
That's a laugh, right? yeah. But I think Ennio Morricone, he's and to see him live, I got to see him live. He toured around Australia, and
Oh, really? How
he
long
was
ago
just-
was this?
I can't remember now. It was probably like 5-6 years ago. I mean, he was conducting.
Yeah.
That's what he does. But it was
Did
still
they
amazing.
use like an Australian orchestra or something? or-
Yeah, I knew someone who was actually in the
Oh, that's
orchestra because
cool.
they needed someone who played the particular instrument that he played. But I mean, it was still, I mean, just like a piece of score, like the one from The Good, the Bad, the Ugly that Metallica used whenever they come out on stage.
Ecstasy of Gold.
Ecstasy of Gold. So when you hear that live, you're just like, oh my god, this is.
Yeah. There's a
I'm
reason why
seeing God now.
Metallica used
Yeah,
that before
yeah.
a metal show, like to pump the crowd up, because it is so epic.
Yeah.
You mentioned in passing Giallo before, and I had completely blanked on this, and this wasn't the example I was going to cite, but I'm going to throw my other example in the bin and talk about the score to Suspiria by Goblin. And also mentioning, live performances. They came for Revelation Film Festival probably about 8-9 years ago now, and seeing them perform that score was unreal. But, that Dario Argento world, the Giallo genre in general, that's a good Giallo genre in general. I'm going to hold on to that for later. Like listening to those kind of, these scores that would influence John Carpenter and be influenced in return, and that kind of that beautiful synth and that sinister nature to it.
Yeah.
That is one of the all-time greats.
Italian prog music was absolutely peaking at that point as well. Like there were so many great Italian prog bands, and it was just so cool that Goblin decided to focus that talent and like into film, into the medium of film. But that album, that score or soundtrack or whatever you want to call it, I guess it's a bit of both, had like some proto like black metal influences as well. So it actually went on to influence like different genres in metal music as well.
Yeah.
And to anyone who wants to buy that soundtrack, I've got it at Eastwick Park. So
Speaking of that soundtrack as well, there's a project over in Melbourne called Hear My Eyes, and it's where they get bands. They project a movie on in the background, and then they get a live band to recompose the soundtrack.
Tropical Fuckstorm did No Country for Old Men.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And
I've heard they're doing Suspiria.
Suspiria, and it's directed by Stu Mackenzie from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. And he'll be performing in it as well. And then I think, two of the other guys from King Gizzard, and one of the ladies in Stonefield, and a couple of other artists that I'm not aware of. So that's happening next month if you're in Melbourne.
See,
I would definitely go to that because it's a great lineup of musicians, all very talented in their own way. That it's an intense, collaboration.
Well, yes. But shouldn't they do that for, like, no, it sounds great. I'm sure it'll be actually like unreal. And we've all seen this. Well, go and watch Suspiria.
I actually have not.
Oh, right. Well, go and watch Suspiria, and
Yeah.
then you can enjoy this other thing. It doesn't ruin Suspiria, obviously.
Yeah.
But I kind of love that idea. But for movies that are great yet have a bad score, like, wouldn't it be cool to see
Yeah.
like we're fixing the score to this movie? Like Suspiria doesn't need fixing, but no, I'm sure that'll be great.
Well, Liam, you mentioned Tropical F Storm or Fuckstorm. I don't know why I'm censoring myself, but like doing the soundtrack to No Country for Old Men, because like I think people forget there's actually aside from the closing credits, there's no score in the film. It's like they
There's a lot of silence in that film.
yeah, they were just like that's where the tension lives in the
Yeah.
silences. So to see them do something with that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
It could ruin the tension at times, but
Yeah.
I love Gareth Lydiard and the music he's created. So it would be pretty awesome as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Suspiria is so iconic. But it's hard. But then again, we've already been through the remake, and so people loved it. I mean, I love the remake. People hated it as well.
Yeah.
And then you had the first score by Tom York, and it was completely different. It was just like a completely different kettle of fish to Italian prog rock. Yeah.
That was yeah. Once again, that was a much more electronic and ambient sort of. There was actually like some actual songs that he wrote and recorded for that score as well. But yeah, that was a fantastic soundtrack. I really enjoyed that one. But yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. It's not like I suppose it's not like they're trying to get Ed Sheeran to redo the soundtrack to Dead Man on his acoustic or something like that.
That's a great idea.
That's one of those jokes that just like the more you think about it and you imagine Ed Sheeran doing his best Neil Young kind of impersonation, the funnier it gets.
Yeah.
I had one that is actually kind of in that vein of artists writing or bands writing music for a movie. It's a little bit left of field. It's actually a surf film.
Cool.
Called where have I got it written down? That's right. Self-Discovery for Social Survival. It's an awesome. It's a collaboration film between. I forget the name of the company that filmed it, but the label Mexican Summer. So they pulled money together, obviously, and they produced this surf film where they filmed surfers in 3 different locations around the world. And then they also approached a bunch of artists to record them making music for it, but there's footage of them actually recording it intertwined with this surf footage. So it's very much a spectacle of both music and surf. Some of the artists they got in, Dung Yen, very prolific, or maybe not so prolific. They're very calculated and take their time, but very well regarded and respected Swedish band. I believe they're Swedish from memory. Alalas from LA,
California.
Yep.
Very surfy.
Yep. And Conan Moccasin, who tying him back into film, used to be a porn director, I found out recently.
Really?
Yeah, back before he became a musician.
Yeah.
He's a strange cat. So like when I heard about that, I was like, that actually does not surprise me. So yeah.
Was this is this pre or post like Endless Summer and Endless Summer 2? Because they were pretty iconic surf films with big selling soundtracks, right? Yeah.
This was released probably about a year ago.
Oh,
It's a
right.
very
Okay,
recent
yeah.
film.
Yeah.
There's quite a long history.
It was a digital release, so they put it straight up on Vimeo, and you just buy it on there. I think it's like, from memory, about $8. Very well worth it. And I think if you buy the film, you get the soundtrack.
What was the name again?
Self-Discovery for Social Survival.
Cool.
It's about 50 minutes, and it's a good watch. Even if, because I'm not too much in surfing, but I can appreciate good cinematography.
Yeah.
And and sick surf moves, if that's what they call it in the industry.
There's a bit of a history of like sort of coveted soundtracks on vinyl to surf films. Like there's an Australian surf film from maybe the mid 70s, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called, but the soundtrack to it is worth about $100, and it's still quite sought after. Someone out there listening to this podcast, I'm sure will know.
Please chuck it in the comments. And
yeah, chuck it in the comments and remind me. I've had it through the store. I have sold a copy before.
what makes it iconic? Did a band do it, or just it's really well done? Or
it was just, I think it was a compilation album.
Oh, okay, sure.
Mixed with some film score as well. But yeah, and I'm sure that's not the only one. I'm sure there's others I've had through as well.
So
It
kind of
seems to be
like
a
what
thing.
Tristan was referring to. I forget the film earlier, where it was the film wasn't popular, but it kind of
But
encapsulated a time period.
The
And a lot of people,
soundtracks kind of like it has created some longevity for the film. Like, giving people a reason to go back and watch it. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, that's it's. Yeah, I've got nothing more to add to that. I just realised.
I had a film score
Yeah.
that I was going to mention, and it's might seem a bit pedestrian off the cuff, but I thought that the score to Fight Club is something that definitely warrants a listen in its entirety, independently of the film, because it's actually, I didn't realize until I picked it up on vinyl, but it's across 2 LPs. It's easily like maybe about 63, 64 minutes worth of just music, and a lot of it is so subtle that you don't actually know it's there in the film.
Is it Dust Brothers? I'm trying to think.
It's the Dust
It
Brothers.
is Dust Brothers. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah. It's just like a true pop lover's, dream. It's just such an amazing soundtrack. But you really have to sit down and listen to it because, like I said, so much of it is so quiet and so subtle. But it just really adds to like the cold kind of callous nature of the film, and there's just something about it. It really, really needs to listen all the way through from start to finish. But one of the cool things about the vinyl issue is it comes packaged in what looks like an IKEA box.
Oh, yeah.
So
This is great, this one.
it's even got like its own little Swedish name, and it's got one of those white sort of, in the vinyl collecting community, call it an obi strip, I guess, around the edge of it with the catalog number, the IKEA catalog number, and everything. And to actually get the records out, you have to destroy the packaging. So it's got like with food packaging where you pull that tab and it creates a rip, and it literally just rips the cover straight in two. And the idea behind it is that you have to destroy something beautiful, which is like, but because I'm like, I didn't want to follow the rules when I got mine. I didn't want to ruin the packaging. I noticed there was like a tab on the side that was like glued down really hard, and I sort of gently peeled it away until I managed to get it open and get the records out.
Well, that's fine, because where are you going to put the records once you break the packaging?
That's a part of the mystery, I guess. But when you actually do manage to get this glued down tab open, there's a hidden message underneath that says, "Stop trying to control everything and just let go." So I kind of felt like it's cool. I'd found that little hidden Easter egg, but I'd almost want to buy a second copy just to do it the right way, because I feel like I cheated the system. But even the records, they're like marbled pink vinyl, and the labels, the center labels are like Paper Street Soap Company, and it's just this such a really well thought out package. It's one of my favorite records that I own, so I spin it regularly. And another quick useless piece of information that I managed to find out about the Dust Brothers when I was doing a bit of research is they actually produced Mbop.
Oh wow!
Like they produced that track.
Which one?
Mbop by
Hanson.
Yeah.
I would know the song. I just can't.
Come on, you know Mbop, man.
Yeah. The big hint is in the title, really. I don't know how else to. Mbop, bip-a-dop, ba-do-bop. Do-da-ba-do-bop.
Oh right, yes. Okay,
It's only like number one for
in
like
every '90s film.
He
ever.
knew all along. He was
Yeah,
just trying to
yeah.
make you guys do that.
It's a credits roll or credit scroll kind of
Definitely
tune that
it's
you
an
put
upbeat
on,
one,
so
yeah.
you get up out of your seat and get the hell out of
Fist
the
pump,
cinema.
freeze frame.
Yeah.
Mbop.
Yeah.
Well, see, it's so because I had that on CD when it was like
Mbop.
no, well, my sister had that, but like I had the Fight Club soundtrack because I loved the movie at that time, and it's just funny to think that I don't think they did another soundtrack, and it's just such a one-off, but it's so the music's great, and I think at the time I only knew them because they had produced some.
They produced Paul's Boutique by the Beastie
That's
Boys,
it.
and they
And
also did
then-
Odelay by Beck.
I think see
I
it.
was listening to that.
Odelay
later.
by Beck, that was a big one. Yeah.
How do you guys feel? Because as you say, it was a bit of a one-off, and Fincher has mostly worked with Trent Reznor over the last decade and a
Yeah,
half
that's
with
right,
his
yeah.
scores. So,
Yeah.
and Reznor's become a pretty accomplished,
Yeah.
composer of scores while still doing his Nine Inch Nails stuff. But yeah, how have you felt about, the Social Network is the iconic one, but I think the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is actually pretty good. There's even teasers of it in Seven, really, because I think Seven has a chopped and screwed version of Animal in the opening credits.
Yes,
Is that
it's-
right? Yeah.
yeah.
So he obviously has always wanted to work in that kind of arena. But yeah, how do you feel about the Reznor stuff?
It's a good point. It's one of those things that I kind of had heard about long ago, that Reznor was doing film soundtracks. I didn't realize that he was he working exclusively with Fincher?
No, he did the Watchmen soundtrack on telly recently.
Yeah, actually,
Box,
that's
which was
Bird Box,
have-
which he said
I
I
have
disowned.
heard that. I have heard that.
Yeah.
A friend of mine played that soundtrack for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It almost sounded and it pretty much sounded like a Nine Inch Nails album, to be honest with you, just instrumental, which I thought was fantastic. But I also hear that because there's a lot of material there to score an entire TV series. That's
It's
a
like
lot.
3 albums, I think, the Watchmen soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
they're
hear
like
that
staggering the release. Of
Yeah.
it.
yeah, I hear that there's going to be another release for the second season and the third season. So God knows how many hours of music that is going to be out there. But yeah, I suppose to anyone listening who's a fan of Nine Inch Nails and hasn't heard that score, you won't be disappointed. Go check it out.
Yeah, see, because I liked his scores, but like I really got into what he and Atticus Ross were doing for the Watchmen score, because there'd be these like scenes where like a character would get like dressed in their superhero gear, and then it's just like really like breakneck, like upbeat, like yeah, it's like a Nine Inch Nails song. I was just like waiting for him to sing, like to hear like bite the hand that feeds or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just such. I was just like thinking, man, this soundtrack maybe it could become really popular with CrossFit instructors or like personal trainers, because it's just like you just get pumped up.
That's
like,
actually
I'm watching a TV
that's
show and I'm just
actually
like
where
getting
I
my
heard
blood
it.
going.
Yeah, that's
In Motion, the track from The Social Network, which is like the opening sort of. I used to listen to that constantly at work when I was writing, because it was just like. It seems weird to want to get motivated to just write, but it was like you could just put your head down and listen to that on loop for hours, and it was just like this driving, pulsating song.
Sometimes you just need something to get you in the right headspace and not distract you at the same time. Which is a very difficult balance to find when you're listening to music.
Yeah. I actually had one come to mind before. It was a film I rewatched this weekend because I've got a little bit of a film club going with some mates where we just catch up. It's a way to catch up. We watch a film that someone recommends, and everyone left after, and we had the sudden impulse to watch Flying Lotus's Kuzo. Have you seen this?
Is this the one from like a year, 2 years
2 years ago,
ago?
2017.
Yeah, and it's
a
horrific, right? Like
it's the most disgusting
yeah,
film.
no, I've not seen it. I very much want to see it. Yeah,
It's fantastic. It's directed by Flying Lotus and David Firth, who did Salad Fingers, the Flash animation from the internet in the early 2000s. So they collaborated and made this film together, and it's just a wild trip. And Flying Lotus obviously remixes a whole bunch of different artists in there. There's like samples from Boards of Canada to some real deep cut Aphex Twin SoundCloud releases when he did a SoundCloud dump a few years ago. I don't know if you know about this, buddy. Dropped about 300 tracks to every Aphex Twin fan's delight on SoundCloud one day and was just like, here you go.
Yeah.
And so he had sampled some stuff from there, and it's just a really good there's a lot of Warp label artists on there, and it's just a good representation of that kind of that world of electronic production. Very enjoyable. A lot of the tracks as well that he made for the film ended up being expanded upon for the following album he did, Flamagra. So a lot of the motifs that are in that film as well appear in Flamagra, which he
So it's kind of like an accompanying piece to the album in a sense.
almost, yeah. And a lot of people, it was actually when that album came out, a lot of people who were disappointed in it, I said to them, have you seen Kuzo? And if they said no, I'd be like, watch that.
The
and
art
then listen to the
style
album.
on the cover also
Exactly,
is very similar.
very
Well,
similar.
It's the collage pop up in the middle of the gatefold. Reminds me of it a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And amazingly, he collaborated with David Lynch on that film. David Lynch has a spoken word track on it that he did the music for, and David Lynch he writes David Lynch.
It's got all the ingredients to make you extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I actually think in terms of David Lynch's recent short pieces, I love David Lynch. I don't know how you felt about What Did Jack Do?
I haven't watched it yet, but
yeah, it was fine.
It was okay. Like, it was fine. It was Lynch, and there wasn't as much like, you watch Mulholland Drive and you're just like, what is he trying to say? And you sit there and he refuses to tell anyone.
Yeah.
And so, and I feel like with Lynch, that's the point, but he says that there is a message behind it, but he just doesn't want to say. But I felt like what he wrote in collaboration with Flying Lotus was a bit better than what he did on his own as like in full David Lynch mode with this What Did Jack Do?
Yeah.
So I was like,
Well, it's interesting because I think David Lynch operates at that level where it's like he works in that kind of dream logic space, right? So it's all
Yeah.
very like primally terrifying, and it kind of like you feel like there's a metaphor there, but you're always kind of searching for it. And I kind of like that to a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
What did Jack do is kind of like, okay, so the monkey, just,
Yeah.
like I don't know if I'd ever really grasped it because it was so short as well.
There was it was just very. It didn't feel like it was really strongly surreal, even though it is very surreal.
Yeah.
He's a detective interviewing a monkey that is suspected of murder,
It-
and so like.
And it kind of plays like a joke, like an actual.
It seems more like a joke
set up
than-
punchline kind of thing, which
Yeah.
isn't how he normally
That's a
operates.
good way of looking at it.
I haven't seen this film.
It's on
but
Netflix.
Do you have to watch Dunstan Checks In first? To
Yeah,
understand what's going on, or-
it's part of the Dunsterverse.
The Dunsterverse. Yeah, it's
But
weird.
it's only like 10 minutes long. It's just a short film. He actually released it, I think, at a film festival in like 2018 or something. And then
I
Netflix
remember
got the
hearing
rights
some
to it.
whispers about it. Yeah, about
Yeah.
a David Lynch and a chimp,
Yeah,
but that's about it. Yeah,
it's ready and waiting for you when you
Yeah,
get home.
man.
The moment you walk in the door,
yeah,
yes.
I'll be
you
watching
have
that.
to say to your partner, like, whatever you're watching, turn it off. We're
Yeah.
watching David Lynch interview a chimp.
Yeah,
But speaking of music,
prepare to
there is
enter
a-
the Dunsterverse.
There is a beautiful song in that the chimp sings as well.
Yes,
yeah,
at
and
the
I
end.
believe he's releasing an album in that character.
What?
Yeah, well, David Lynch has
David
released
Lynch has a
music.
couple of albums.
Yeah, he's released music and he's worked with a lot of different artists, and those artists have worked in his films. And I think I read like he was gonna do an album in that character of the
Wow.
chimp.
Wow.
That doesn't surprise me though,
Yeah.
as well as surprised as I sounded. So yeah, any other mentions of soundtracks or official scores?
Oh,
or-
look, I'll give really passing, fleeting mention. Soundtrack to Climax. You mentioned Aphex Twin. There's, Window Licker gets a good play on that, but The Supernature by Cerrone, that's a great opening track. John Bryan was the composer I was going to mention. He did Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, Synecdoche, New York, I Heart Huckabees, and Amy Mann did a lot on Magnolia as well. Was influenced by her music. I did want to say I've been going through the process of, my wife's pregnant, so we're actually getting the room in our.
congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
We're getting a room in our house ready for like a nursery, but it just so happens that the room is where I've stored all my DVDs and CDs throughout the years. That's fine. Babies deserve that room more. But I'm actually de-sleeving all my DVDs and CDs. So I've gone through like my entire collection, except for the special stuff.
Is it going in like a DVD wallet kind of
It
thing?
is like these. I've got these literally 500. I've got
Wow.
like multiple 500 DVD wallets. So these things are never getting coming out. So I've put the special ones aside. And one of those special ones, as I found, was the first CD I ever bought, which was the Space Jam soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
And so
Dan, that's a good one.
I cracked that the other day, and it
Hell
is still
yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
It's really good. You've got
that was
Hit 'Em-
Seal, I believe.
Kelly did, I believe,
Kelly.
fly. Seal did fly like an eagle. But it's got
Like an eagle,
Hit 'Em
yeah.
High with Busta Rhymes. That's great. Chris
Title
Rock-
track, Space Jam.
Space Jam, of course.
Is that Salt and Pepper or something like that on that one?
No, it's Salt and Pepper have a different song on there. I forget what that's called. But Chris Rock does a cover of Basketball Jones, the Cheech and Chong
I
song.
can't even like think of the soundtrack because I don't think I've watched it since I was a little kid.
Oh,
And I
yeah, yeah.
smashed it back then.
Yeah, but the soundtrack I listened to it a lot, and it is still
Awesome.
good. It is
If
still good.
anyone
Hell
who is in charge of records today is listening, please consider reissuing Space Jam on vinyl.
I think they actually did a couple years back.
Yeah, I
Did
thought
they?
they
Pretty
would've
sure
done
Space
that.
Jam was like the
Alright,
26
scratch that.
in 2017.
I must have
think.
missed it
Actually, I think it might have been a UK one or something like that. One that was
Maybe,
another
maybe.
territory got, but not.
because that's something I would like to have just to have.
Well, with Space Jam 2 coming out this year.
Hang on, what?
Yeah, Space
Is it
Jam
actually
2.
happening?
Oh, yeah, it's been filmed. LeBron James.
LeBron, that's right. Yeah,
Yep,
LeBron's doing it.
How's that going to go with the whole China controversy?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if China will accept the release of Space Jam 2, which is probably half the point of making the thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless,
Yeah.
you would think that you're going to get like there'll be revival screenings of Space Jam. There'll be like they'll reissue the soundtrack. There'll be a new one, which will be awesome probably.
Yeah.
I'm actually excited about this. Space Jam 2.
Yeah. Well, Bill and Ted 3's coming out as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the Wild Stallions. There you go. Some more
Yeah.
music.
They've like, and that's actually they've posted photos of them on set and everything. Like, they probably
Yeah.
by now in post.
I thought it was just a meme to begin with. to be honest.
No, it was, and I thought because it was for as long as I can remember, like Bill and Ted 3's happening. Oh, the script's done. Blah 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 blah. Like, I remember being like a teenager and finding out about Bill and Ted and reading like when I did the Wikipedia deep dive on it that number 3 was coming, and then like probably about 3 months ago they released a video of them talking to the camera, and they were on the set, and they were dressed up as Bill and Ted, and it's about Bill and Ted's daughters, having to kind of take the throne. Very much. Did you see Jay and Silent Bob Reboot?
No.
But,
I'm looking more forward
What's your
to...
feelings on Kevin Smith films?
Look, I'm looking more forward to Bill and Ted than...
I grew up loving Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
One of those discs that I kept was Chasing Amy Criterion Collection Edition.
Is that a Criterion?
Yeah, I don't know how, but I love that. I do like that film, even though it's dated pretty badly. But the recent ones, like... I watched Tusk, I watched Yoga Hoses, and then I was like, I'm going to tap
Yoga
out.
Hoses, I just read about it, and I was like,
tapped
But
out.
I watched Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, and I tell you what, it was a lot better than I expected, because I
Okay.
went in with very low
The
expectations.
first film was one of my favorite. It's not really a film for children, but it was one of my favorite childhood films.
Which one? Jane Silent Bob?
Strike Back.
Strike Back, yes.
Yeah. I've actually got something to mention about that in the next podcast.
Yes.
Oh.
Well, maybe that'll be a good transition for us. Tristan, was there anything you wanted to give
Well, I'm going to
honorable
just
mention
quickly
to?
clip
Yeah,
through
yeah.
as we get into the closing moments of this year-in podcast. But the soundtracks that I just want to mention, Wang Chung doing the score and the music for William Friedkin's To Live and Die in L.A., just such a great moment of 80s-ness, but it's such a great soundtrack as well. Mika Levi, I think the score to Under the Skin is going to be one that is just... I think it's already influential now. It's iconic, and I think it's going to just become one that we look back on and think, okay, that's when people just started changing.
And the Jackie score's good too.
Yeah,
She did
Jackie,
that,
Nicholas Britell's score for If Beale Street Could Talk, that makes me cry. Phantom Thread, Johnny Greenwood, everything that Johnny Greenwood does is pretty great. The Drive soundtrack. The other thing I want to mention, this is a very obscure one, but there's a film called Thief of Hearts from the 80s. It's a pretty soapy crime erotic thriller. It's the film's not that good, but I do enjoy it, and it's mainly because of the soundtrack, and it's produced by Harold Faltermeyer, and all the songs on there are just sleazy 80s kind of disco. It's such a great soundtrack. I found it for $3 in a secondhand thing, and it was just a dream moment to find this obscure soundtrack. So yeah, Harold Faltermeyer, the composer of the Beverly Hills Cop theme, Axel F, all the scores that he's done. I can't vouch for Cuffs, but Tango and Cash, Top Gun, they're iconic classics. So yeah, those are ones that I'll just finish with.
Yeah.
But I think anyone who's interested in soundtracks and movie music, there's some really good shows out there in the Mixcloud world. So Play Morricone for me is a good radio show about movie soundtracks, and another one is the Score, which comes out of Radio Quantica. That's always got great obscure just soundtrack moments. Yeah.
I'm definitely going to be hitting that up. I'll make sure to put a link as well in the podcast to those ones as well. So, yeah, Liam, did you have any others that you wanted to quickly mention?
Just quickly, I was going to mention the Life Aquatic because there's kind of three facets to that I think is interesting. So, Brazilian musician Seu Jorge has a starring role in that film. He plays one of the crew. His name is Pele dos Santos. But anyway, I just love the way that throughout key moments in the film or transitional moments in the film, he's just sitting alone, just not really caring about much, playing his nylon string guitar, just singing David Bowie covers in his native Portuguese tongue. And I just love those versions of the song. I've actually got a bootleg copy of all of the David Bowie songs that he sings on that film. Also, any soundtrack that has Devo on it gets a special mention for me. So Gut Feelings, one of their best tracks ever. And then Mark Mothersbaugh, apparently, who was the singer and one of the lead songwriters from Devo, actually did the score work for that film as well. But yeah, I mean,
didn't he do the soundtrack for Rushmore as well?
He does a lot of
probably
scores.
did.
Yeah,
Does he?
Yeah.
I have a feeling that Wes Anderson's a massive fan. He must be a massive fan of Devo and probably works with them on numerous occasions. But yeah, I just think Wes has a really fantastic knack for just pairing his films with popular music. So yeah, that was my other one.
Sweet. Oh well, I think that's all of my. Oh, the last one, that I have to give a very significant honorable mention or quick mention to is The Pick of Destiny, the Tenacious D film.
Yeah.
One of my
Nice.
favorite
POD,
films
yeah.
as a teenager. I can sing along to every single word of that soundtrack and not miss a beat. It is ingrained in my memory. It is I don't care what people say. Great film.
Dave Grohl like flicking his tongue around.
Yeah.
It's just burned into my memory.
Yeah. Start to finish, all killer, no filler.
Yep, absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Car Chase City. What a
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Break-In City as well. That
Oh,
was
yeah.
that
How
was a
can we
good one. But there's a Judas Priest reference in there as well when he notices the security camera and screams "Electric Eye." Reference to
I
the
never
Judas
picked that
Priest.
up. That's great. Yeah.
There's a lot because I grew
There's
up as like a
levels to
very
this,
lot of
Pick of
Easter eggs.
Destiny, yeah.
classic rock kind of mega fan, and you're watching, you pick up on these little like references that they must have labored over for so long. They're just like, all right, just get a list of song titles and how can we fit this in somehow.
Yeah, and Meatloaf as the religious dad is just like
that's a good-
fantastic as well. Like
Yeah.
so well cast. Like I couldn't imagine it being anybody else other than Meatloaf.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wicked. All right. Well, I think it'll be good to wrap it up there. We'll mention as well, obviously, that we're going to be jumping on Movie Squad's podcast
oh, yeah.
now. So we haven't quite worked out the scheduling, but it'll be they'll orbit around each other somehow. We'll link to each other. But yeah, so go listen to that episode if you enjoyed this one and vice versa. Awesome. Simon, Tristan, thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
See you again soon.
Yeah.